Welcome to another edition of Cattle Chatter. I'm Susan Littlefield, and lots of things have happened since last week. And we're going to revisit, of course, that big chart reversal that we saw last week. But the excitement that some rains that came through just may have kept a few girls from having to go to town. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more as we break up today's market trade and this whole week's action as Brad Kooima joins us. He is with Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's reverse to last week. We were kind of Debbie Downers. I had a cattle guy go, man, I felt like I needed a shot of whiskey after listening to you two talk. But now, as we move off that big chart reversal of last week, what are your thoughts as you revisit that and see what the momentum is for this week, Brad?
Thanks for having me on, Susan, of course. Yeah, I got a lot of that feedback last few days, Susan, of, geez, I liked you better when you were bullish. And I go, yeah, I like me better too when I'm bullish,
Me too.
And I guess, to say that I'm all bared up about the thing, the reality though is, okay, the technical part of the market is part of the market, whether we want to, believe it or not, people, says, go to a sale barn. Yeah, I get it. I'm 67 years old. I've fed cattle for 50 years. I get it. But I also get it that the futures do influence the market. And if you don't think they are, then you are sadly mistaken. So when you hang out a big reversal like we had last week, I mean, that's the way cattle top and bottom. I mean, they just go straight up and then they just stop. And, is there some bearish reason? Yeah, once in a while there is something that comes out, I mean, you have a September 11, you have a mad cow, you have coronavirus, and, but, it's a classic way to do it. And then, so you have the big reversal from all-time highs, huge volume. And then you had huge follow through the following day where we were sharply lower again the next day. So you have to, I mean, either if unless you never look at a chart, which obviously we all do because the funds trade the charts. That's what they trade. That's what the AI generated HFTs, all these stuff. That's what they care about. So you have to at least, I mean, give it a nod, right? And so, I thought we started out the week a little tenuous. And I'm happy to report that we've handled this pretty well. Now, to really totally eliminate the reversal, we've got to take out the highs. I guess you asked me today. I think the front months probably will. Today, June cattle gapped higher. I would have liked to see the spreads maybe act a little better. It seems to me like June ought to be the strongest one, given its place as compared to cash, the basis, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I also understand that the funds aren't in the June for the most part anymore. They're in the back months. So, I mean, that's where the fund buying came. So we're through 50% retracement. So we've taken quite a bit of pressure off of the reversal deal. But, that way I feel, I'm a fundamentalist, obviously, as well. But the way this cash market feels to me, I mean, and it was awesome the last 2 days, right? I mean, I got 231 an hour and a half ago, 231. It's pretty hard for me to be negative the front end of the cattle market when you're traded at this big of a discount.
So are we cleaning up the show lists that are out there? Because you and I know the weights are heavy on these.
It's a great question. We did here clean up the show list that I'm aware of. My brother sells fat cattle, you know that. But it's a. I'm not going to lie. That you start to do some calculations of even if you can feed what you have for a couple of weeks, the cost of gain is not $2.31. It's half that. A great big steer that's not very efficient, but you start to do the dollars and the math of, well, how much is that steer actually worth in 2 weeks? It doesn't take too much to get to $40 a head, and so I am trying to keep as good an objective eye on that phenomenon. Last week I was puzzled a little bit because our carcass weights dropped a lot, right? I think we talked about it, 8 or 10 pounds. I thought, wow, we're finally going to do the seasonal as we go into calves, right? Now this week we were back up a little bit, 2 pounds over a week ago and 17 pounds over a year ago on carcasses. So the weights remain quite large. So I don't see, I think guys are still in the mode that they haven't had a chance to sell cattle at these highs yet. Perhaps they're a farmer feeder that just feeds calves. So he missed that yearling run, didn't have yearlings, and he's going like, I want in on this action because the cattle make tons of money. But we've got to keep an eye on that because replacement costs are very, very high. One could actually make a scenario: cheap feed, replacement costs are high. Why don't I feed him another week? Why don't I feed him another week? I don't see that here yet. I think Iowa still in general is extremely current, which keeps me also quite confident that we're okay yet.
Box Beef likes to play this consumer confidence game that even post Memorial Day, the buy is going to be beef going into those baskets.
It sure looks like it. We have just a little bit of looked like maybe the demand is difficult. I've tried to explain this before. It's difficult to measure, right? Because cattle's different than corn. Okay, you got a bin full of corn today, and you still got a bin full of corn 6 months from now. Okay, as long as it doesn't spoil, obviously get hot, blah blah blah. Cattle is a perishable commodity. You don't throw it away. You sell it for as much as you can, as however much you can sell as high as you can. There's more than measure of demand when you're talking about something like that, beef and pork. So we did have a little pump the brakes action on the grind here 2 weeks ago, where we saw the 90s and the 93% back up just a little bit. Now this week we're back higher again. I actually view the high price we're able to command for that product as being bullish. That what tells me that that's what the consumer has switched to, the ones that are maybe trying to save a little money, that they're on a budget, a tighter budget. The demand for, like I've showed before, the demand for pork and poultry stays very flat, while the demand for beef continues to improve year on year. So, and lately led by that. So the last 360 area on the boxes. Of course, we went way past that 440 or something like that during COVID. But this is more of a in a normal market situation. This is as high as we've been on the boxes. So it would appear like so far so good on the demand for sure.
In this last week, we've seen some very much appreciated rains. And I said at the open, it might have kept a few girls from having to go to town. And I think there's been some concern about how dry these pastures have been.
There's no question, and you're sitting in kind of maybe on the fringe of it, but I mean, your area in West has been, everybody that knows anybody out there knows just how critical the situation, probably still is, but maybe not as bad. If you can say, I did get picked up some rain, and that's Western South Dakota, that's a big area, Wyoming, and especially the western part of Nebraska. Areas that traditionally hold a lot of cows, areas that traditionally they make a lot of yearlings. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about, are we going to have to see more cows go to town even, and then I don't know. I think that these guys are going to do whatever they can to keep their cow herd. We've liquidated this cow herd down to a absolute skeleton, bare bone type of a situation already. But your question, I think, is more significant in terms of we're watching for this. Where does this camshaft tip over? Where do we start to rebuild, right? Where do we finally start to save a few heifers? You went through record percentage of heifers on feed in 22 and 23, down just a minuscule amount in 24, not enough to call it that you were holding them really. And now are we or are we not? So whip out your crystal ball. I wished I had one. The last quarterly cattle on feed report was our first hint that, yes, we are saving some. It's quite regional, okay? Mostly north and a little bit in the southeast. But it appears like, you've got a smaller percentage of heifers on feed now than you've had for a couple of years. It's still not like, oh, my goodness, dramatic like we have in 15, where they just flipped the switch and changed it by about 12%. And again, whether you've got enough feed, as to your question about the rain's a big deal, because if it continues and if they have confidence that they're going to have some feed, that's going to give them confidence to maybe save a heifer. But I also know from talking to those guys that, 1-2 inch rain doesn't mean I'm going to have rain here yet in July and August. So hopefully it keeps coming.
Definitely. So wanted to ask real quick before we wrap this up, New World screwworm. Obviously, the borders have been closed once again, but is the market nervous? Is this that kind of black swan that everybody's concerned might take over this cattle complex? Should it be found here in the States?
That's a good question. They've been super aggressive at trying to do whatever they can to keep it out of here. I think they've beefed up protocol that in case we get it, we know how to beat beat the system. We know how to get rid of it, right? We did it once in the 60s. But it's to the point where, you almost like you feel like you're trying to sleep with one eye open. I'm sensitive to what this Make America Healthy report's going to say. Yeah, I mean, is there going to be something that is, everybody seems to be worried about, the herbicide, insecticide part of the, is there going to be something on there about that? But what if there's something in there that we didn't expect in terms of, if you eat beef, you're going to grow a third eye or something, I mean, so that's out there. And the other thing I think that you got to keep in mind, everybody, a little bit is that was a 90-day hold. Okay. I mean, we haven't necessarily kissed and made up with Canada and Mexico here yet. So, come 4th of July, I would say between worried about a drought and what's happening with the tariffs, we got plenty to talk about that first week of July when we come into that, right? But hopefully we can avoid that stuff. And if we can, I think the market continues to handle itself pretty well.
All right, we're going to end on a positive note. Memorial Day weekend is quickly upon us. Bring out those grills. Let's get some good beef going across it for you. What's going to be hitting the grill for your family?
Well, we're going to do our share. There's no question about it. And you have a really, really fun weekend because you've got something going on too, I know. So good for you.
Got a wedding. We're going to showcase some beef as well. So a happy Memorial Day. And of course, a time for everybody to reflect and remember. And we'll catch up again next week.
Sounds good. Thank you, Susan.
Best way to get a hold of you?
kkvtrading.com is the website. And our number, 712-722-0023.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, another version of Cattle Chatter.
The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.